The steam from the noodle stall carried the scent of ginger and star anise, but underneath it lingered something else, something metallic that made Elise's stomach tighten. The lunch rush had died down to a handful of stragglers, and she was wiping down the counter when she noticed the boy standing at the edge of her stall, perfectly still. He couldn't have been more than 8, with dark hair that caught the afternoon light filtering through the market's canvas awnings. His clothes were expensive, too expensive for the usual crowd that frequented her corner of the Portland Saturday market. But it wasn't his designer jacket that made her pause. It was the way he stood there, watching her with eyes that seemed far too old for his face. His small hands clenched at his sides. "Hi there," Elise said gently, the same tone she used with Mina when her daughter was being shy. "Are you looking for something to eat?" The boy's mouth opened slightly, then closed. His eyes darted to the menu board, then back to her face. Something about his expression, equal parts hopeful and resigned, reminded her of Mina during her selective mutism phase last year. Elise crouched down so she was at his eye level, the concrete rough against her knees through her jeans. "It's okay," she said. "Take your time." That's when she saw it, his hands moving in small, tentative gestures. ASL. She'd learned it years ago when she'd worried about Mina's speech development, and though she was rusty, she caught enough to understand. Food. He signed, then pointed to the fiashao. "Please." "Of course," Elise said aloud, then switched to sign language. "What kind would you like?" The boy's eyes widened, and for the first time his rigid posture relaxed slightly. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth as he began to sign more confidently. "Chicken, no onions, extra broth." Elise nodded and began preparing his order, her hands working automatically while she snuck glances at him. There was something unusual about the boy beyond his muteness, a stillness that seemed unnatural, like he was holding his breath. And his skin had an almost translucent quality in the dappled market light. "Here you go," she said, sliding the steaming bowl across the counter. When their fingers brushed as he reached for it, his skin was cold as winter morning air. The boy's smile widened, the first genuine expression she'd seen from him, and he signed, "Thank you," with such careful precision that her heart squeezed. "You're very welcome," she replied, both aloud and in sign. That's when she felt it, the sensation of being watched, but not by the usual market crowd. This felt different. Heavier. Like a shadow had fallen across her stall despite the bright afternoon sun. She looked up and saw him. The man stood about 20 feet away, partially hidden behind Mrs. Rodriguez's flower stand. Tall, with dark hair similar to the boy's, but where the child seemed fragile, this man radiated a kind of controlled power that made the air around him seem to vibrate. He was watching the interaction with an intensity that made Elise's skin prickle. Their eyes met for a split second, and she felt a jolt run through her. Not fear, exactly, but recognition of something far beyond her understanding. The man's expression was unreadable, but she caught something that looked almost like surprise before he stepped back into the crowd. When she looked down, the boy was already halfway through his pho, eating with careful, deliberate movements. He glanced up at her and signed. "This is very good." "I'm glad you like it," Elise said, but her attention kept drifting to the spot where the man had been standing. The feeling of being observed hadn't faded. The boy finished his meal in silence, then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a $20 bill, far more than the $8 the PHO cost. "Keep it." He signed when she started to make change. "That's too much," Elise protested, but the boy was already backing away from the stall. He turned to leave, then paused and looked back at her one more time. "My father," he signed, pointing in the direction where the man had been standing. "He has been looking for someone like you for a very long time." Before Elise could ask what he meant, the boy disappeared into the crowd, moving with that same unnatural stillness. She stood there holding the 20, the scent of star anise, and that underlying metallic smell still heavy in the air. Elise. Mina's voice cut through her thoughts as her daughter bounded up to the stall, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Can we get ice cream before we pack up? Please? Elise forced a smile and tucked the 20 into her apron pocket. Of course, sweetheart. Let me just clean up here first. But as she began wiping down the counter again, her hands shook slightly. The boy's final words echoed in her mind. Someone like you. What did that mean? And why did the memory of the man's eyes make her feel like she'd just stepped onto a path she couldn't see the end of? The afternoon sun was beginning to slant lower through the market's canopies, casting longer shadows between the stalls. The usual sounds, vendors calling out their wares, children laughing, the distant hum of traffic, seemed muted somehow, as if the world had shifted just slightly off its axis. Mom, Mina tugged at her arm. You look weird. Are you okay? Elise looked down at her daughter's concerned face and felt a familiar surge of protectiveness. Whatever had just happened, whatever that strange encounter meant, she couldn't let it affect Mina. I'm fine, baby, she said, smoothing Mina's hair. Just thinking about something. Ready for that ice cream? As they walked through the market toward the ice cream vendor, Elise couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching them. She glanced over her shoulder once, but saw only the usual crowd of Saturday shoppers. Still, the sensation persisted, like a weight between her shoulder blades. When they reached the ice cream stand, Mina was chattering about her friend's upcoming birthday party, but Elise found herself scanning the crowd instead of listening. Looking for what? She wasn't sure. Dark hair, cold hands, eyes that seemed to see too much. Mom, you're doing it again, Mina said, tugging on her sleeve. Doing what? The worry face. The one you make when you're thinking about grown-up stuff. Elise forced herself to focus on her daughter. Sorry, sweetheart. What flavor do you want? As Mina deliberated between mint chip and strawberry, Elise felt her phone buzz in her pocket. A text from an unknown number. Thank you for your kindness to my son. We will not forget it. Her blood went cold. She looked around the market again, more urgently this time, but saw no sign of the man or the boy. How had he gotten her number? She'd never given it to anyone at the market except the other vendors. Mom? Mina's voice seemed to come from very far away. Are you sure you're okay? You look really scared. Elise deleted the text and slipped her phone back into her pocket. I'm not scared, she said, though her voice sounded unconvincing even to herself. Just surprised by something. Come on, let's get that ice cream and head home. But as they stood in line, another text came through. This one made her hands go numb. My son smiled today because of you. In return, I must warn you, you are being watched by others now. Others who do not share my gratitude. The ice cream vendor was asking what she wanted, but Elise could barely hear him over the sound of her own heartbeat. She looked down at Mina, who was licking her strawberry cone and humming happily, completely unaware that their ordinary Saturday had just become something else entirely. Ma'am, the vendor asked again, what can I get you? Nothing, Elise managed. Nothing for me. She took Mina's free hand and began walking quickly toward their car, that metallic scent from earlier seeming to follow them through the crowd. Behind them, she could swear she heard footsteps that matched their pace perfectly, but every time she looked back, she saw only strangers. As they reached the parking lot, one more text arrived. Be very careful who you trust, Elise Walker. Your kindness has been noticed by. The message cut off there, incomplete, leaving her staring at the screen with growing dread. How did he know her full name? And what had her simple act of kindness at the noodle stall set in motion? Mom, you're squeezing my hand too tight, Mina complained. Elise loosened her grip but didn't let go. Whatever was happening, whatever she'd stumbled into by helping a mute child order lunch, she had the terrible feeling it was only the beginning. "Let's go home, baby," she said, her voice barely steady. But as she fumbled with her car keys, she couldn't shake the certainty that home might not be safe anymore either. The car ride home was a blur of stop signs and traffic lights that seemed to last forever. Elise's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles had gone white, and every pair of headlights in her rearview mirror made her stomach lurch. Mina chattered from the back seat about her friend Jessica's birthday party next weekend, but her voice sounded distant, filtered through the rushing sound in Elise's ears. "Can we stop for groceries?" Mina asked as they turned onto their street. "We're out of cereal again." "Tomorrow," Elise said, pulling into their apartment complex's parking lot. She scanned the area automatically now, looking for expensive cars, for figures standing too still in shadows, for anything that felt wrong. Everything looked normal, too normal. Their apartment was on the second floor of a converted Victorian house, with narrow stairs that creaked and walls thin enough that they could hear Mrs. Chen's television through the floor. It had always felt safe before, cozy in its smallness. Now, as Elise unlocked the door, it felt exposed. Mina dumped her backpack by the door and headed straight for the kitchen. "I'm still hungry. Can I have a snack?" "Of course." Elise locked the door behind them, then checked it twice. She moved to the living room window and peered through the blinds down at the street. A black sedan was parked across from their building, one she didn't recognize. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown number, but not the same as before. "The kindness you showed has consequences. We know where you live." Elise's hand started shaking so badly she nearly dropped the phone. She deleted the message immediately and backed away from the window. "Mom?" Mina appeared in the doorway holding a granola bar, her expression worried. "Why are you acting so weird?" "I'm not acting weird," Elise said, but her voice came out too high. She forced herself to smile. "Just tired from the market." Mina studied her with the unsettling perceptiveness that 7-year-olds sometimes possessed. "Are we in trouble? Like when Dad—" "No," Elise said quickly. "No, sweetheart, we're not in trouble. Everything's fine." But even as she said it, she was thinking about locks and escape routes, and whether their fire escape was sturdy enough to support both their weights. The rational part of her mind insisted she was overreacting, that the texts could be from anyone, that the boy at the market had probably just been a normal child whose father had somehow gotten her number through perfectly innocent means. The rest of her knew better. Mina went back to the kitchen, and Elise found herself pacing the small living room, her mind racing. The boy's signing had been too perfect, too formal. His skin had been cold in a way that didn't match the warm afternoon. And the man, there had been something in his eyes that spoke of depths she couldn't even imagine. "Someone like you," the boy had signed. What did that mean? What was she exactly that made her worth watching? Worth warning? Her phone rang, making her jump so violently she nearly knocked over a lamp. Unknown number. For a moment she considered not answering. But what if it was school? What if something had happened to— "Hello?" Her voice was barely a whisper. Silence. Then, very quietly, "Elise Walker." It was a man's voice, smooth and cultured with just the slightest accent she couldn't place. Not the same person who'd sent the texts. "Who is this?" she managed. "Someone who wants to help you understand what you've walked into." A pause. "My name is Alexander, the boy you helped today. Nico. He is my son." Elise sank onto the couch, her legs suddenly unable to support her. "How did you get this number?" "That's not important right now. What matters is that your act of kindness has put you on the radar of people far more dangerous than I am. and that's saying quite a lot. I don't understand. I just helped a child order food. That's all. No, Alexander said quietly. You did much more than that. You showed genuine compassion to someone who has been invisible for most of his life. You treated him as if he mattered. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Elise could hear Mina moving around in the kitchen, the normal sounds of their normal life, and felt the surreal disconnect of having this conversation while her daughter made herself a snack 10 feet away. What do you want from me? She whispered. Nothing. But others want a great deal. They want to know why my son responded to you the way he did. They want to know what makes you different. His voice hardened. And they are not known for their patience or their mercy. I'm not different. I'm just a single mother working 3 jobs to keep her daughter fed and housed, a woman who learned sign language because she was worried about her child's development, someone who sees a frightened boy and responds with kindness instead of suspicion. Alexander's voice grew softer. That makes you extraordinarily different, Elise. In the kitchen, Mina dropped something, and the crash made Elise jump again. I have to go, she said. Wait. The urgency in his voice stopped her. There will be others coming to your stall tomorrow. Men who work for people I used to call allies. They will seem friendly at first. They will ask casual questions about Nico, about what you talked about how you knew sign language. Do not trust them. Then what am I supposed to do? A long pause. Stay close to crowds. Don't go anywhere alone. And if you see Nico again, when you see him again, know that his presence means you are under my protection. Your protection from what? But the line had already gone dead. Elise sat there staring at her phone, her heart hammering against her ribs. In the kitchen, Mina was humming while she cleaned up her mess, the most normal sound in the world. It made everything else feel like a fever dream. She checked the locks again, then pulled the blinds closed completely. The black sedan was still there. Mom? Mina appeared in the doorway again. Can we watch a movie? Please? You look like you need to sit down for a while. Sure, baby. Pick whatever you want. As Mina scrolled through their streaming options, Elise found herself studying her daughter's face, the curve of her cheek, the way her hair fell across her forehead, the small scar on her chin from when she'd fallen off her bike last year. Everything that mattered in the world, sitting right there on the couch beside her. They want to know what makes you different. She thought about the boy, Nico, and the way his whole face had changed when she'd signed back to him. The surprise and joy in his expression, as if no one had bothered to learn his language before. What kind of father let his child go through the world that isolated? And yet Alexander's voice on the phone hadn't sounded cold or neglectful. It had sounded protective, concerned, almost desperate. This one, Mina announced, selecting an animated movie they'd seen at least a dozen times, the one with the singing fish. Perfect choice, Elise said, pulling her daughter closer. But as the opening credits rolled, her phone buzzed with another text. We will be watching until we understand what he sees in you. This time, she didn't delete it. She screenshotted it instead, though she wasn't sure why. Evidence, maybe. Or just proof to herself that this wasn't all in her head. Outside, night was falling earlier than it should have in late spring, and the streetlight across from their building flickered intermittently, casting shifting shadows on their wall. Elise found herself counting the intervals between flickers, using it as a rhythm to slow her breathing. Mina fell asleep halfway through the movie, her head heavy on Elise's shoulder. Normally, Elise would have carried her to bed, but tonight, she couldn't bring herself to move. The weight of her daughter felt like an anchor to normalcy, to the life they'd built together in this small apartment with its creaky floors and thin walls. Her phone stayed silent for the rest of the evening, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had fundamentally shifted. Tomorrow she would have to go back to the market, back to her stall, because they needed the money, and because running would only make things worse. She would smile at customers and make small talk, and pretend that everything was fine. But she would also be watching, looking for men who asked casual questions, listening for footsteps that matched her pace too perfectly, waiting for a mute boy with cold hands to appear at the edge of her stall again. Because whatever she had walked into by showing kindness to a child who needed it, she was in it now. And the only way forward was through. The movie ended, but Elise didn't turn off the television. The soft glow and gentle soundtrack felt like a barrier against whatever was waiting outside their door. She closed her eyes and tried to remember what normal felt like, but all she could think about was the boy's smile and his father's voice saying, "That makes you extraordinarily different. Different enough to be worth protecting. Different enough to be worth threatening. Different enough to change everything." The next morning arrived gray and drizzly, the kind of Portland weather that made colors seem muted and sounds travel strangely. Elise had barely slept, and when she had, her dreams were full of dark figures and text messages that wouldn't stop coming. She made coffee with shaking hands while Mina got ready for school, trying to project normalcy even though every sound from the street made her freeze. "You look terrible, Mom," Mina announced over her cereal. "Are you sick?" "Just tired, sweetheart. I'll feel better once I get some caffeine in me." But as they walked to Mina's school, Elise found herself checking over her shoulder every few steps. The black sedan wasn't there anymore, but that somehow made her feel worse, not better. At least when she could see the threat, she knew where it was. "Mrs. Walker?" Mina's teacher, Ms. Harrison, called out as they approached the school entrance. "Could I speak with you for a moment?" Elise's stomach dropped. "Is everything okay?" "Oh, yes. Mina's doing wonderfully. I just wanted to let you know there was a man here yesterday afternoon asking about her. Said he was considering enrollment for his own child and wanted to know about our security procedures." The world seemed to tilt slightly. What did he look like? Mid-40s, well-dressed, very polite. He had some kind of European accent. Ms. Harrison smiled. "He seemed particularly interested in our pickup and drop-off protocols. I gave him our standard information packet." Elise forced herself to nod calmly. "Thank you for letting me know." But inside, her mind was screaming. They knew where Mina went to school. They were asking about security, about pickup procedures. After Mina disappeared into the building with her backpack and lunchbox, Elise walked to her car on unsteady legs. Her phone was already buzzing with a text from an unknown number. Beautiful child. So trusting. Third grade at Lincoln Elementary, correct? This time, she didn't delete the message. She forwarded it to the police tip line instead, though she doubted they would take it seriously. No direct threats, no obvious crimes. Just questions and observations that made her skin crawl. The drive to the Saturday market felt like moving through a dream. Every red light stretched on forever. Every pedestrian at a crosswalk might be watching her. Every car in her mirrors could be following. By the time she reached her usual parking spot, her hands were cramping from gripping the steering wheel. Setting up her stall was usually meditative, the familiar ritual of arranging supplies, lighting the burners, preparing ingredients. Today, each movement felt performed for an invisible audience. She kept expecting to turn around and find someone standing there, watching her with two still eyes. The lunch rush started normally enough. Her regular customers came by, made their usual orders, complained about the weather and their jobs and the price of gas. Mrs. Rodriguez waved from her flower stand. Mr. Chin from the tea booth brought her a cup of jasmine green, as he did every Saturday. Everything was exactly as it should be, which was why she noticed immediately when things began to change. It started with the questions. Casual at first. Customers who'd never shown interest in her personal life suddenly wanting to know if she had family, if she'd always worked at the market, If she knew sign language? When she asked why they were curious, they shrugged and said they were just making conversation. But their eyes were too focused, their casualness too forced. Then she noticed the watchers. Men in expensive clothes who didn't buy anything but lingered at nearby stalls, always keeping her in their peripheral vision. They rotated positions every hour or so, but there was always at least one of them present. By noon, her nerves were stretched so thin that when someone approached her stall from behind, she spun around with her ladle raised like a weapon. "Whoa," said Thomas, one of the other vendors, raising his hands in surrender. "Just me, Elise. You okay? You seem a little jumpy today." "Sorry," she managed, lowering the ladle. "Just tired." But Thomas didn't move away. Instead, he glanced around casually, then leaned closer to her counter. "Listen, I don't know what's going on, but you've had visitors today. The expensive kind. The kind that make other vendors nervous." "What do you mean?" "3 different guys have been asking questions about you. Separate times, casual-like. But they all wanted to know the same things. How long you've been here, if you have family, if you ever talk to anyone unusual." Thomas's expression was serious. "One of them flashed enough cash to make Mrs. Rodriguez very chatty about your schedule." Elise felt the blood drain from her face. "What did she tell them?" "Everything she knows. Which isn't much. Thank God." "But Elise—" Thomas glanced around again. "These aren't bill collectors or social workers or whatever normal trouble you might be in. These guys have a vibe. The kind of vibe that makes smart people walk away." Before she could respond, Thomas straightened up and moved away, greeting someone behind her with forced cheerfulness. Elise turned and saw a man in a charcoal suit approaching her stall. Mid-40s, well-dressed, with pale eyes and the kind of smile that never reached them. "Good afternoon," he said, his voice carrying just the hint of an accent Ms. Harrison had mentioned. "I was hoping you could help me with something." Every instinct she had screamed at her to run, but her feet seemed rooted to the ground behind her counter. "What can I get for you?" "Actually, I'm more interested in information than food." The man's smile widened, but it made him look less friendly, not more. "I understand you had an interesting encounter yesterday, with a young boy who doesn't speak." "I serve a lot of customers," Elise said carefully. "I don't remember anyone specific." "Oh, I think you do." The man leaned against her counter, close enough that she could smell his cologne, something expensive and cloying. A boy about 8 years old, dark hair, very well dressed. He would have been unusual because of his condition. The way he said condition made her skin crawl. "I'm sorry, I really don't—" "The thing is," the man continued as if she hadn't spoken, "this boy's father is very protective, perhaps overprotective. And when someone new enters the boy's life, especially someone who seems to understand him in ways others don't, well..." He straightened up, still smiling that empty smile. "His father tends to get curious about their intentions." "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." The man pulled out his wallet and placed a $50 bill on her counter. "For your time and your discretion. Because I'm sure you understand that some conversations are better kept private." He started to walk away, then turned back. "Oh, and Elise? That's a lovely school your daughter attends. Very secure. Though I did notice the playground fence could use some work." This time, when he smiled, she could see his teeth were too white and too sharp. After he disappeared into the crowd, Elise stood there shaking, staring at the $50 bill as if it might bite her. The money felt contaminated, but she couldn't bring herself to touch it to throw it away. "Elise." A quiet voice behind her made her spin around again, but this time her heart rate slowed instead of spiked. It was Nico, standing at the edge of her stall exactly as he had yesterday, but today his stillness looked different. Protective instead of uncertain. "Are you afraid?" He signed. She looked around quickly, but saw no sign of his father. The watchers were still there, but they seemed less focused now, as if Nico's presence had changed something fundamental about the dynamic. Yes, she signed back, because lying to a child, even this child, felt wrong. Nico nodded as if he'd expected that answer. The bad men asked you questions. It wasn't a question, so she just nodded. My father says you are brave. He says brave people are worth protecting. Nico glanced around with those two old eyes, then looked back at her. But he also says some protection comes with a price. What kind of price? Elise found herself signing before she could think better of it. Trust, Nico replied. And change. Everything will be different after. Before she could ask what he meant, he was walking away, moving through the crowd with that same unnatural stillness. But this time, she noticed something else. The watchers were following him, not her, as if his presence had shifted their attention completely. Her phone buzzed. Alexander's number. My son likes you. That is rare. It is also dangerous. Meet me tonight. Pioneer Courthouse Square, 9 p.m. Come alone, or don't come at all. Elise stared at the message, her mind racing. Meeting a stranger at night was exactly the kind of thing every safety instinct told her to avoid. But the alternative, continuing to live with this growing sense of threat, with men asking questions about Mina's school, felt even more dangerous. She looked up at the market around her, at the familiar faces and ordinary chaos of her Saturday routine. Everything looked the same, but she could feel the change Nico had talked about pressing at the edges of her normal life. Everything will be different after. Maybe it already was. The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur of forced normalcy. She served customers, made small talk, cleaned her equipment, and packed up her supplies. But underneath it all, she was thinking about choices and consequences and the weight of a mute boy's trust. By the time she picked up Mina from her after-school program, she'd made her decision. Tonight, she would meet Alexander Romano. She would find out what she'd stumbled into and what it would cost to protect her daughter from it. Because one thing was becoming crystal clear. Ignoring this wouldn't make it go away. As they drove home through the early evening traffic, Mina chattering about her day, Elise caught sight of a familiar black sedan in her rearview mirror. It followed them for 3 blocks before turning away, but the message was clear. They were still watching, still waiting, still deciding what her kindness was worth. But tonight, she would finally get some answers. And maybe, if she was very lucky and very careful, she would find a way to keep the life she'd built for herself and Mina intact. Even if everything else had to change. The school pickup line felt different on Monday afternoon. Elise waited in her car with the engine running, scanning every face that passed for signs of recognition or interest. When Mina emerged from the building with her usual bounce and chatter, Elise felt a surge of relief so strong it made her dizzy. "How was your day, sweetheart?" she asked as Mina buckled her seatbelt. "Good. We started our volcano project in science, and Jessica invited me to her birthday party on Saturday. Can I go? Please? Her mom said she'd pick me up and everything." The birthday party. Elise's hands tightened on the steering wheel as she remembered Alexander's words from their meeting the night before. Trust comes with consequences. Your daughter will be safer if she maintains her normal routines, but she will never be completely safe again. Not unless we end this. We'll see, Elise said, pulling out of the school parking lot. But even as she said it, she was thinking about the man in the charcoal suit and his too sharp smile, about the way he'd mentioned Mina's school like a casual observation. They were halfway home when Mina pointed out the window. "Mom, why is that same car following us again?" Elise's blood turned to ice. In the rearview mirror, she could see the black sedan 3 cars back, maintaining perfect distance. "What do you mean, sweetheart? It was behind us when we left school yesterday, too, And the day before, I noticed because it has a crack in the windshield that looks like a lightning bolt. Smart girl. Too smart. Elise forced her voice to stay calm. I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Lots of people drive the same routes. But she took 2 unnecessary turns on the way home, and each time the sedan followed. By the time they reached their apartment complex, her shirt was damp with sweat despite the cool afternoon air. The sedan drove past as they parked, but not before Elise got a clear look at the driver, a different man than the one who'd approached her stall, but with the same pale eyes and predatory stillness. Inside their apartment, Mina went straight to her homework while Elise stood at the kitchen window, watching the street below. The sedan was parked a block away, just visible between 2 houses, close enough to watch their building, close enough to follow when they left. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Lovely afternoon for a drive. Your daughter has excellent observational skills. Elise deleted the message immediately, but her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the phone. They were escalating. Moving from watching to direct contact, to letting her know they were watching Mina specifically. Alexander had warned her this would happen. They will push until they get a reaction, until they understand what makes you valuable to my son. The only way to end it is to give them what they want, or to make them understand the cost of continuing. At the time, his words had seemed abstract, almost philosophical. Now, watching her daughter work on math problems at the kitchen table while strangers cataloged their daily routines, the threat felt viscerally real. Mom? Mina looked up from her worksheet. You're doing that thing again where you stare out the window like you're waiting for something bad to happen. I'm not. Elise started, then stopped. Lying to Mina hadn't protected her so far, and her daughter was clearly picking up on the tension anyway. I'm just being careful. There have been some strange people around lately. Mina's expression grew serious in the way that always reminded Elise how much older than 7 her daughter sometimes seemed. Because of the boy you helped at the market? The question caught Elise completely off guard. How do you know about that? You started acting weird right after that day, and you keep checking your phone like you're scared of what the messages say. Mina put down her pencil. Is he in trouble? The boy? It's complicated, Elise said finally. But yes, I think he might be. And helping him might have put us in a difficult situation. Are we going to be okay? The simple directness of the question made Elise's throat tight. She moved away from the window and sat down beside her daughter. I'm going to make sure we're okay. But it might mean some changes for a while. Being extra careful. Maybe having some new people in our lives. New people like the boy and his dad? Elise nodded. His name is Nico, and his father is protective. Very protective. Good, Mina said with the fierce certainty of childhood. Someone should protect people who need it. That evening, after Mina was asleep, Elise sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea that had gone cold hours ago, staring at her phone. Alexander had given her his direct number with strict instructions. Only call if there is immediate danger, or if they escalate beyond surveillance. The text about Mina's observational skills felt like escalation, but was it enough? Or was she overreacting, letting fear make her paranoid? Her phone buzzed with another message. Saturday would be an excellent day for a family outing. The park near Lincoln Elementary has such lovely playgrounds. Perhaps we'll see you there. This time, she didn't delete it. This time, she called Alexander. He answered on the first ring. What happened? They're not just watching anymore. They're making contact. They mentioned Mina specifically. She read him the messages, her voice steady despite the fear clawing at her chest. The silence on the other end stretched so long she thought he'd hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was colder than she'd ever heard it. They've made their choice then, and now I must make mine. A pause. Keep Mina home from school tomorrow. Stay inside. Do not go to the market. I can't just hide forever. I have bills to pay, responsibilities. You have a daughter to protect. Alexander cut her off. And after tomorrow, she will either be safe or we will all be beyond the reach of safety. What are you going to do? What I should have done the moment they started following you. His voice softened slightly. Elise, what I told you about consequences, about everything changing, that time is here. After tomorrow, there will be no going back to the life you had before. And if I say no, if I take Mina and run, then you will spend the rest of your life running, and they will eventually catch you. Alexander's voice was gentle but implacable. Running only delays the inevitable. Trust is the only path forward. After he hung up, Elise sat in the dark kitchen for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of their building settling. Around her, Mrs. Chen's television murmuring through the floor, the teenager next door playing music too loud, the ordinary soundtrack of their ordinary life. Tomorrow, if Alexander was right, that ordinary life would be over forever. But as she finally got ready for bed, checking the locks one more time and pulling the blinds closed against watching eyes, she realized she'd already made her choice. The moment she'd signed to a frightened boy at a noodle stall, she'd chosen connection over safety, kindness over caution. Now she would have to live with the consequences. The next morning dawned clear and cold, with the kind of sharp October light that made everything look too bright and slightly unreal. Elise called in sick to her boss at the cleaning company and sent an email to the market coordinator saying she had a family emergency. Then she made breakfast for Mina and tried to act as if keeping her daughter home from school was perfectly normal. Are we sick? Mina asked, suspicious. We're having a mental health day, Elise said, which was true enough. Sometimes people need a break from routine. They spent the morning doing puzzles and watching movies, but Elise found herself checking her phone constantly. No messages from Alexander. No updates from the unknown numbers that had been texting her. The silence felt more ominous than the threats had. Around noon, Mina fell asleep on the couch, exhausted by the novelty of a weekday at home. Elise covered her with a blanket and moved to the kitchen window, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't name. The street looked normal, empty of the black sedan, empty of watchers, empty of anything that seemed out of place. The silence stretched on, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the normal rhythms of their neighborhood. It was almost 2 o'clock when everything changed. The first sign was the sound. A low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once, like thunder, but sustained and somehow wrong. Elise pressed her face to the window, trying to see the source, but the street still looked empty. Then the lights went out, not just in their building, but everywhere she could see. The traffic light at the corner went dark. The electronic billboard across the street flickered and died. Car alarms began going off in a discordant symphony that made her teeth ache. Mina woke up with a start. Mom? What's happening? I don't know, sweetheart. Stay right there. But even as she said it, Elise could see figures moving in the street below. Men in dark clothes emerging from cars she hadn't noticed, converging on their building with purposeful coordination. Too many of them. Too organized. Her phone rang. Alexander's number. Get Mina and go to your fire escape, he said without preamble. Now. Don't pack anything. Don't hesitate. Move. What's happening? The power? They've decided to end this quickly. Go. Now. The line went dead, and Elise could hear footsteps on the stairs outside their apartment. Heavy boots, multiple sets, coming up fast. Mina. She kept her voice calm despite the panic clawing at her throat. We need to go out the window, right now. To her credit, Mina didn't argue. She grabbed her backpack, a 7-year-old's version of emergency preparedness, and followed Elise to the fire escape window in her bedroom. The metal platform was narrow and rust-stained, but it held their weight. Below them, Elise could see more figures surrounding the building, but they seemed focused on the front entrance. The fire escape was on the backside, hidden from the street. They were halfway down when the front door of their apartment exploded inward. Through the broken bedroom window, Elise could see flashlight beams sweeping through their living room, could hear voices calling instructions in languages she didn't recognize. Mina's hand was small and cold in hers as they reached the ground level. "Mom, I'm scared." "I know, baby, but we're going to be okay, I promise." The alley behind their building opened onto a side street, and Elise had never been more grateful for the maze-like layout of their neighborhood. They'd barely made it to the corner when she heard car engines starting behind them, the sound of pursuit beginning. But then, from somewhere ahead of them, came another sound. Footsteps moving toward them, not away. Someone was coming from the direction they needed to go. Elise pulled Mina behind a parked car, her heart hammering so hard she was sure it could be heard blocks away. The footsteps got closer, measured and unhurried, and she realized with growing despair that they were trapped between two groups of pursuers. The footsteps stopped just on the other side of the car they were hiding behind. "Elise," Alexander's voice, quiet but carrying clearly in the cold air. "It's safe now." She stood up slowly, still holding Mina's hand, and saw him standing in the street like he'd been waiting there for hours. His expensive coat looked out of place against the backdrop of their working-class neighborhood, but his presence felt solid and reassuring in a way that made no logical sense. Behind him, Nico emerged from the shadows between two houses, moving with that same unnatural stillness, but somehow managing to look like any other 8-year-old boy. "The men in our building," Elise started, "are no longer a concern," Alexander said simply. "They overestimated their position and underestimated mine." As if to underscore his words, the sounds of pursuit from behind them had stopped completely. The car alarms were still going off, but the shouting voices and running footsteps had been replaced by an almost supernatural quiet. Nico approached them slowly, his dark eyes fixed on Mina. When he was close enough, he signed something to Elise. "Is she hurt?" "No," Elise said out loud, then repeated it in sign. "She's scared, but she's not hurt." Mina looked back and forth between them, then stepped forward with the fearless curiosity of childhood. "Are you Nico? My mom told me about you." Nico nodded, then looked at his father as if asking permission for something. Alexander gave an almost imperceptible nod. "Hello." Nico signed to Mina. "I am sorry you were frightened." "I can't understand that," Mina said, but not unkindly. "Can you teach me?" The smile that crossed Nico's face was like sunrise after a long night. He looked at Elise, then at his father, then back at Mina. "Yes," he signed. "I would like that very much." Alexander moved closer, his expression serious. "We need to leave here. The situation is contained for now, but there will be questions. Investigations. Your apartment is no longer safe." "Where are we supposed to go?" Elise asked, though part of her already knew the answer. "With us," Alexander said simply. "If you're willing to trust that the protection I offer is worth the changes it will require." Elise looked down at Mina, who was watching Nico with fascination, then back at Alexander. The man who had somehow stopped a coordinated attack on their home, who had appeared in their neighborhood like he'd materialized from thin air, who spoke about protection and consequences with the authority of someone accustomed to wielding power she couldn't begin to understand. "My daughter," she said quietly, "if we come with you, what happens to her normal life? Her school, her friends, her childhood?" "She will be safer than she has ever been," Alexander replied. "And Nico will have a friend for the first time in decades." As for normal, he glanced around at the darkened street, at the evidence of whatever he'd done to neutralize the threat. "I think that ship has already sailed." Mina tugged on Elise's hand. "Mom?" The pretty boy is trying to tell me something. Elise looked down to see Nico signing to Mina with patient repetition. Will you come home with us? He's asking if you want to come home with them, Elise translated. Mina considered this with the serious attention she brought to all important decisions. Would I still get to have my birthday party? Jessica's mom already bought decorations. Despite everything, the fear, the upheaval, the complete destruction of their normal life, Elise found herself smiling. We'll figure out the birthday party, sweetheart. Then okay, Mina decided, but I want to learn to talk with my hands like him, and he has to promise not to be scary. Nico signed something that made Alexander's expression soften in a way Elise hadn't seen before. He promises, Alexander translated, to be the best friend she's ever had, and to protect her always. As they walked toward Alexander's car, a sleek black vehicle that had appeared as silently as its owner, Elise felt the weight of the choice she was making. Behind them, their apartment building was dark and violated. The life she'd built there ended as abruptly as it had begun. Ahead of them was uncertainty, protection that came with undefined costs, and a future that would be built on trust in people she barely understood. But Mina's hand was warm in hers, and for the first time in days, she wasn't looking over her shoulder for threats. Whatever came next, they would face it together, all four of them, bound by a moment of kindness that had changed everything. The car pulled away from the curb, carrying them toward a new life that had started with sign language at a noodle stall and would end with whatever came after trust. Alexander's estate was nothing like what Elise had imagined. Instead of Gothic architecture and imposing gates, it was a sprawling modern house tucked into the hills outside Portland, all glass and natural wood that seemed to grow from the landscape itself. The security was invisible, but unmistakably present. She caught glimpses of cameras, sensors, and at least 3 people who moved through the grounds with the purposeful alertness of professional protection. It's like a castle, Mina breathed as they walked up the front steps. But a nice castle, not a scary one. Nico had been signing to her during the car ride, teaching her simple words and phrases with endless patience. Now he signed something that made Mina giggle. What did he say? Elise asked. He said it's not a castle, it's a fortress. But fortresses can be homes too. Mina looked up at Alexander with the directness that adults often found unsettling. Are you a king? Nico said you protect people. Something like that, Alexander replied, and Elise caught a hint of amusement in his voice. Though these days I find myself more interested in being a father than a ruler. Inside, the house was warm and lived in despite its size. There were Nico's drawings on the refrigerator, books scattered on coffee tables, and the comfortable disorder of a home where a child actually lived. It made Alexander seem more human, less like the dangerous stranger who had orchestrated their rescue with terrifying efficiency. I've prepared rooms for both of you, Alexander said, as they stood in the front hallway. But I understand if you need time to process what's happened. This is a significant adjustment. Elise looked around at the space that could be their new home, safe, comfortable, and completely foreign to everything she'd known. The men who came to our apartment, what happened to them? They were encouraged to pursue other interests, Alexander said simply, permanently. The implications of that statement settled over her like a cold weight. She'd known, intellectually, that Alexander was dangerous. But seeing the evidence of it, the way armed men had simply vanished, the way he spoke about neutralizing threats as casually as discussing the weather, made it real in a way that left her breathless. Mom? Mina was tugging on her hand again. Nico wants to show me his room. Can I go? See? Elise looked at Alexander, who nodded. He's been looking forward to having a friend visit. The staff knows to keep an eye on them. As the children headed upstairs together, Mina chattering and Nico responding in sign with growing animation, Elise found herself alone with Alexander in the spacious living room. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unasked questions and the weight of everything that had changed. "I need to understand what we've walked into," she said finally. "Not the sanitized version, the truth." Alexander moved to the windows that looked out over the city below, his hands clasped behind his back. "The truth is that my world is built on power, territory, and the understanding that weakness is an invitation to violence. For 20 years, I've maintained my position through careful alliances and strategic intimidation. And Nico? Nico is my heir, my weakness, the one thing that could be used against me by anyone who understood how much he means to me." Alexander turned back to face her. Until last week, he'd never connected with another human being, never shown joy or curiosity, or any of the things that make childhood precious. I had resigned myself to raising a son who would be functional, but never truly alive. Elise could hear the children's laughter from upstairs, bright and incredulous, as if they couldn't believe their luck in finding each other. "Your kindness changed that," Alexander continued. "In 5 minutes at a noodle stall, you gave him something I couldn't provide in 8 years of trying. That makes you invaluable to me. It also makes you a target for anyone who wants to hurt me through him. So this is permanent? We can never go back to our old life? Would you want to?" Alexander asked quietly. "Knowing what you know now about the world that exists parallel to the one you thought you lived in? Knowing that your daughter was in danger from the moment you chose compassion over indifference?" The question hung in the air between them, and Elise realized she didn't have an answer. The life they'd left behind had been small and safe and entirely her own. But it had also been precarious in ways she hadn't fully understood, vulnerable to the whims of people with more power and fewer scruples than she'd imagined possible. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we see if trust can become something more than a survival strategy." Alexander's expression softened. "You've seen what I'm capable of when threatened, but you haven't seen what I'm like when the people I protect are safe and happy. I hope, with time, you'll find that version of me more to your liking." Before she could respond, Mina came racing down the stairs with Nico close behind her, both of them breathless with excitement. "Mom, you have to see his room. He has a whole wall of books and a telescope, and he's teaching me how to sign birthday party because guess what?" Mina's eyes were shining. "Alexander said I can still have my party here on Saturday, and Jessica and everyone can come, and there's going to be a bouncy castle." Elise looked at Alexander in surprise. "You don't have to." "Actually, I do," he said seriously. "Normal childhood experiences are exactly what Nico has been missing, and what better way to introduce him to your daughter's world than through a proper birthday celebration?" Nico signed something elaborate to Mina, who nodded enthusiastically even though she clearly only understood half of it. "He says birthday parties are like festivals," Mina translated imperfectly. "And festivals are how people show they're happy to be together." "That's exactly right," Alexander said, and for the first time since she'd met him, his smile looked entirely genuine. "Festivals are how we celebrate family." As evening settled over the house, Elise found herself in the kitchen helping Alexander prepare dinner while the children worked on homework at the dining table. It should have felt awkward, this domestic scene with a man who'd upended her entire life in the space of a week. But instead, it felt surprisingly natural. "You're good with her," she said, watching him patiently explain a math problem to Mina, while Nico worked on his own assignments nearby. "I've had practice with difficult questions," Alexander replied. "Though I admit, third-grade mathematics is more challenging than most international negotiations." The casual mention of international negotiations reminded Elise again of the vast gulf between their worlds. But somehow it didn't feel as daunting as it had that morning. Maybe it was the sight of Nico helping Mina sound out difficult words, or the way Alexander had automatically cut Mina's sandwich into triangles because that's how she liked them. Maybe it was just that protection, when offered genuinely, felt different than she'd expected. "The birthday party," she said. "Will it be safe? Having other children here? Other parents?" "The safest place they could possibly be," Alexander assured her. "And an important step in establishing your new life. The neighbors need to see that you and Mina belong here now, that you're under my protection." The word protection still made her slightly uncomfortable, carrying, as it did, implications of ownership and obligation she wasn't ready to examine. But watching Mina laugh at something Nico had signed to her, seeing her daughter's face bright with the possibility of new friendship, Elise found she could live with discomfort if it meant Mina could live with joy. That night, as she tucked Mina into bed in a room that was larger than their entire apartment had been, her daughter looked up at her with serious eyes. "Are we going to stay here forever?" Mina asked. "I don't know, sweetheart. How would you feel about that?" "I like it here. I like Nico. And Alexander is nice, even though he's kind of scary. And I feel safe." Mina considered this. "But I miss our old home too." "That's okay," Elise said, smoothing her daughter's hair. "It's okay to miss things even when you're happy about new things. They can both be true at the same time. Like how Nico is sad about his mom but happy about having us here." The observation caught Elise off guard. "What did he tell you about his mom?" "That she died when he was little, and that's why he doesn't talk out loud anymore. But he said maybe someday he might want to try again, because now he has people who would listen." Mina yawned. "I told him I would always listen, even if he just wanted to sign." After Mina fell asleep, Elise stood in the hallway outside the children's rooms, processing the weight of trust that had been placed in her daughter's small hands. A boy who hadn't spoken in years was considering finding his voice again because a 7-year-old had promised to listen. The responsibility of it was staggering. "She's remarkable," Alexander said quietly, appearing beside her. "Both of them are." "They're just children," Elise replied. "They don't understand how complicated this all is." "Maybe that's why it works," Alexander said. "Adults complicate things with fear and assumptions and the weight of past experience. Children see what's actually there: a lonely boy who needs a friend, a girl who needs protection, two families that could be stronger together than apart." Elise looked at him in the dim hallway light. This man who spoke of violence and protection with equal ease, who had somehow made space in his fortress for birthday parties and homework help and the normal chaos of childhood. "What are we doing, Alexander?" she asked quietly. "What is this becoming?" "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know it's the first time in years I've looked forward to tomorrow instead of just preparing for it." The honesty in his voice made something shift in her chest, a loosening of the tight knot of fear and uncertainty she'd been carrying since that first text message. This wasn't just about protection anymore, or obligation, or the strange circumstances that had thrown them together. This was about the possibility of building something new from the wreckage of what they'd lost. Saturday arrived bright and clear, perfect weather for a birthday party. Elise woke early to help Alexander and his staff transform the backyard into a 7-year-old's dream: bouncy castle, balloon arches, a table laden with cake and ice cream, and enough treats to fuel a small army of children. "You really didn't have to do all this," she said for the third time, as Alexander adjusted the height of a piñata. "Yes, I did," he replied, and she was beginning to understand that when he said something was necessary, he meant it with a depth that went beyond normal social obligations. Mina spent the morning flitting between excitement and nervousness, trying on 3 different outfits before settling on her favorite purple dress. Nico watched the preparations with wide eyes, signing questions about party games and whether he was supposed to bring a present even though he lived in the same house. "The present is that you're here," Mina told him seriously. Friends are the best presents. When the guests started arriving, Elise felt a familiar flutter of social anxiety mixed with something new. The fear that the other parents would somehow sense that their lives had been completely upended, that they were living under the protection of a man whose power came from sources she still didn't fully understand. But Alexander had been right about the importance of normalcy. The parents who dropped Pet off their children were polite and friendly, making casual conversation about school and neighborhood events as if this were just another birthday party in just another beautiful house. Mrs. Peterson, Jessica's mother, lingered after the other parents had left. I have to say, Elise, you landed in a lovely situation here, and Mina seems so happy. The move has been good for both of you. Yes, Elise agreed, watching Mina direct a game of freeze dance with the authority of someone who had never doubted her place in the world. It really has been. The party was a revelation. Nico, initially overwhelmed by the noise and chaos of 8 7-year-olds hopped up on sugar and excitement, gradually found his footing. He couldn't participate in the verbal games, but he became the undisputed champion of charades, his expressive signing translating perfectly to acting out animals and movie titles. When it came time for cake, Mina insisted that Nico help her blow out the candles. Make a wish for both of us, she told him, and Elise saw Alexander's expression soften as his son closed his eyes and made what was probably the first birthday wish of his life. As the afternoon wound down and the last of the guests were picked up, Elise found herself helping clean up with a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in months. This was what normal looked like in their new life. Not the small, careful normal of their old apartment, but something bigger and more generous, built on the foundation of safety that Alexander provided. Did you have fun? She asked Nico as they carried empty plates into the kitchen. He nodded enthusiastically, then signed something that made Alexander smile. He says it was the best day of his life, Alexander translated, and he wants to know if we can have another party next week. We'll see about that, Elise laughed, but I'm glad you enjoyed it. That evening, after Mina had fallen asleep surrounded by new toys and leftover cake crumbs, Elise found Alexander on the terrace overlooking the city. The lights below sprawled out like a constellation, and for the first time in weeks, the view didn't make her feel small and vulnerable. Thank you, she said, settling into the chair beside him. For all of it. The party, the safety, the chance for Mina to just be a normal 7-year-old for an afternoon. Thank you, Alexander replied, for giving my son a reason to make birthday wishes. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the distant sounds of the city below. Finally, Elise asked the question that had been weighing on her all week. What happens when they grow up? Mina and Nico. What kind of world are we preparing them for? Alexander considered this carefully. A better one than the one I grew up in. A safer one than the one you were raising Mina in alone. Beyond that, he shrugged. We do our best to give them the tools they need and hope they're wiser than we were. Is that enough? It has to be, Alexander said simply. Love and protection and the promise that they'll never face the world alone. That's the best any parent can offer. As if summoned by their conversation, Nico appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleepy eyes and looking younger than his 8 years in dinosaur pajamas. Bad dream? Alexander signed. Nico shook his head, then walked over to Elise and climbed into her lap with the casual trust of a child who had never doubted his welcome. He signed something to his father, who looked surprised. What did he say? Elise asked, automatically adjusting her arms around Nico's small frame. He said he wasn't having a bad dream. He was having a good dream, and he wanted to make sure we were both still here when he woke up. The simple statement hit Elise like a physical blow, the weight of this child's trust settling around her like armor. Nico had lost his mother, had spent years in isolation despite having a father who would move mountains to protect him. and now he was checking to make sure his new family hadn't disappeared while he slept. "We're here," she said softly, stroking his hair. "We're not going anywhere." Nico signed something else, and Alexander's voice was rough when he translated. He says this feels like the family he always hoped for, but didn't know how to ask for. Looking out over the city lights with Nico warm and trusting in her arms, Alexander solid and protective beside her, and Mina sleeping safely upstairs surrounded by birthday treasures and new friendships, Elise realized that her son, because that's what he was now, wasn't he, had put words to something she hadn't been able to name. This was what she'd been hoping for too. In all those long nights working multiple jobs and worrying about money and wondering if she was enough to give Mina everything she needed. Not just safety or security or even love, but the sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. The knowledge that they were part of a family that would fight for each other, protect each other, and choose each other again and again. "I love you too," she whispered to Nico, though he hadn't spoken the words aloud. Some things didn't need translation. Alexander reached over and covered her hand with his, warm and steady and sure. "So," he said quietly, "I suppose this makes us a family?" "I suppose it does," Elise agreed, and for the first time since that afternoon at the noodle stall, the future felt like something to look forward to rather than survive. Below them, the city glittered with a million individual lights, each one representing lives being lived, choices being made, kindnesses being offered or withheld. Somewhere in those lights were the people who had threatened them, the normal life they'd left behind, and the uncertainty that came with any major change. But up here, on this terrace, in this moment, they were safe. They were together. They were home. And that, Elise thought as Nico's breathing deepened into sleep and Alexander's thumb traced gentle patterns across her knuckles, was more than enough to build a future on.